The Master might be Paul Thomas Anderson's masterwork or masterpiece. That's up for debate, but I think this is a absolutely great movie in a great number of ways. Yet it is somewhat difficult. It doesn't give you obvious frameworks by which to understand it. You have to persevere with it. A lot of people on the internet, and I think this is justified and right, would say this is about Scientology, but I think there's a lot else going on here. In particular, this movie is about the Joaquin Phoenix character, Freddie Quell, and focuses quite a bit on him. So let's try to appreciate this movie and unpack it. Now, to answer the question of the title of this video, the things that make this movie great, the performances are absolutely outstanding. I don't think anybody could do better than this. Joaquin Phoenix here, obviously Philip Seymour Hoffman, Amy Adams, and the list just goes on and on. Also, Johnny Greenwood's score I just love it to death. And of course, Paul Thomas Anderson, his crew, cinematography, everything looks great. There's some outstanding, breathtaking shots and transitions in this movie. And just from a technical aspect, I think this movie is very well made. But this movie surprisingly syncs up with film history quite a bit. If you think about the classic 1946 movie, The Best Years of Our Lives, about 3 World War II servicemen from the United States coming back home, trying to adjust to life back in the United States post-war. It's a Wonderful Life has a similar kind of vibe with, actually, Jimmy Stewart in real life had to adjust coming back to war, but also the idea of adjusting to post-war life and what's that like, especially for servicemen who suffered various traumas. They saw various things. Their lives were changed, probably for the worse. That is the case for Freddie Quell, played by Joaquin Phoenix at the beginning of this movie, in some, I think, masterful and artful shots. For the first 10 minutes of the movie describes, but visually mostly, Freddie's, transition from World War II and being in the Pacific Theater to then post-war life. First shot of the movie is this churning sea, and we get this shot 3 times in the movie, once in the middle and once near the end, and Freddie is associated with the sea, the churn of the sea, the instability of it compared to the land, and that's going to be a common theme in the movie where Freddie goes from land to sea again. That's how he meets Lancaster Dodd, in fact, is to go onto a boat and to sail from the west coast to the east coast of the Panama Canal. Freddie's called a sailor a lot of times, and his instability versus the attempt to stabilize him as the cult of this, whatever this is, Scientology or something else, will try to do through therapy, time travel therapy, is part of the movie. Can Freddie be cured, quote unquote? What is a cure? What is a seaman? What is a person at sea versus land? That sort of thing, and so on. First time we see Freddie, we only see his eyes. He's covered his top of his head and the bottom of his head. And this limited view of Freddie is really interesting because we do seem to get a glimpse of Freddie throughout the movie. Yeah, I think we do really only have that limited view that we get in the very first shot of him. But then Freddie's associated with various kinds of animalism. He's called animalistic in several points in the movie. It's a very overt idea and theme that Freddie is kind of an animal who likes to have sex. Sex is on his mind all the time. That will be contrasted with the idea of the cause, which Lancaster Dodd champions, is that humans aren't animals. And this idea of, are we the id that Freddie Quell is, or the superego that Lancaster Dodd is? Something like that shows up all over this movie. In fact, I would argue that this movie harkens not just to Best Years of Our Lives, but also to Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick's work about a young hoodlum who is crazy, animalistic baby, is criminal, and he's being institutionalized and trying to cure him, trying to change his mind and change his behavior. Kind of what's going on in this movie with Freddie Quell. It's some very intense scenes in the middle and later in the movie where they try to fix Freddie, change him with their various kinds of therapy that they undergo in this cult or cause. So the question, can the animal man be changed into a human or the perfect, as the cause would have it? This reminds me, in fact, of, and I don't know the movie is referencing it, but The Island of Dr. Moreau, where the animals are changed or tried to be changed into men, hybrid animals, and then they call Dr. Moreau Master. Well, that's kind of what's going on in this secluded enclave of Lancaster Dodd, where everyone's calling him Master, and Freddie Quell becomes kind of the animal man in his group or entourage. This is made pretty overt that Freddie is the animal and Lancaster Dodd is trying to reform him, in the one scene where Freddie listens to recordings over and over again of Lancaster Dodd saying, man is not an animal, man is a human, humans are more than this, and so on.
Man is not an animal. We are not a part of the animal kingdom.
Freddie. Oh, you're a mischief. It's a horrible young man you are. This is acting like an animal. A dirty animal that eats its own feces when hungry.
So then a couple of things have already popped up. You have the sort of neutral, chaotic Freddie, the animalistic man, versus Lancaster Dodd, who believes that we are spirits or something like that, and that we are more than just, biology. But then you also have this theme of the post-war soldier trying to adjust to civilian life, and you can see why this cause in the movie is attractive, because the government takes Freddie through a number of therapy sessions, can't fix him, is unhelpful. Whereas the cause, which is somewhat helpful, it's giving him a community, something to believe in, and so on. And what else do people need? Traumatized individuals who lost their parents, such as Freddie, whose father is dead, his mother is in, as he says, a loony bin. What else does he have? He's an isolated individual. Here the theme or ideas of existentialism come in. We need a community to be humans. And then this movie, here Freddie finds that in post-war America through this cause, which comes in and is popularized as L. Ron Hubbard literally was in history. Lancaster Dodd in this movie, fictionalized right after World War II in post-war America. Thus, I think this movie is harkening to another movie, one of my favorites. I've covered it on this channel, The Thin Red Line. That movie ends with the sea churning and soldiers leaving the Pacific Theater, hopefully spiritualizing it for the better. But this movie sort of picks up at the end of The Thin Red Line, and it gives you their trauma and the spiritual problems of these sort of soldiers who are trying to adjust to civilian life but can't, such as Freddie. The dynamic between Lancaster Dodd and Freddie, to me, is absolutely fascinating. It's a weird friendship. It's one of those buddy American friendships that shouldn't work but don't. They complement each other. One's thin, one's heavy. I find Lancaster Dodd, in fact, to be sort of Citizen Kane-like, to harken back to another movie. Kind of, sort of, in certain scenes, looks like Kane, or Kane grown up, a little bit older. Of course, a character of himself, maybe a bit of a fraudster, a larger-in-life personality in Citizen Kane. I think that's what's showing up here in this movie as well. Freddie's attracted to the cause. He's going to work sort of as a guard dog or bodyguard or animalistic man defending the cause. But of course, Lancaster Dodd can't even suppress his own desires to be animalistic. Several outbursts, in fact, in the one scenes where he calls, and I'm not going to say the word because YouTube will censor me, a pig F.
I'm sorry you're unwilling to defend your beliefs in any kind of rational
Oh,
way.
if you already know the answers to your questions, then why ask? Pig.
That sort of line comes up and indicates the animalism at the heart of people. And this movie asks a gigantic question. Are we naturalistically biological creatures who can't get beyond our own naturalistic urges? And this comes up in Clockwork Orange and Stanley Kubrick's work. Or are we something larger than that? And this time travel therapy that the cause, it does, the processing that they do to try to get us in touch with whatever it is, the past lives, is that going to bring us back to perfect? We're originally perfect, but fallen. Now, Freddie actually has some dreams and desires of his own. He talks about a dream of his family. He maybe longs for nuclear family life. And then, of course, the girl that he left behind, Doris, who haunts the movie, and in a wonderful scene. Well, I think one of the best scenes in the movie, one of the best scenes you can watch as far as an acting masterclass, where Lancaster Dodd processes, quote-unquote, with Freddie Quell, and you just watch Freddie sort of open up and talk about Doris, this lost love of his life whom he abandoned. The movie will pick back up on that later, and Freddie will go search for her on land, on the motorcycle, and go into the infinite horizon on land. And that's how he leaves. This is a bit of a spoiler, but how he leaves the cult is he goes beyond the point that Lancaster Dodd has for him, but to try to search for Doris, that lost love. So those two things, the nuclear family dream, the lost love dream. What does Freddie really want? What will satisfy Freddie? These questions come up. What satisfies individual human beings? What do they need and long for? What are substitutes for that? And this image of the Sand Queen, this naked, huge naked woman in the sand that Freddie dry humps at the beginning of the movie. But then that's the last shot of the movie. Freddie is with that Sand Queen again. What is that indicating? A fantasy on Freddie's part? The thing that will fulfill this animalistic man? There's a lot of ways to interpret this, but certainly the cause or cult may have helped him a bit, but he's gone beyond that at the end. To bring up Clockwork Orange again, the ending of the movie, I think, is a quote of the ending of Clockwork Orange, where "I was cured" is the line at the end of Clockwork Orange, said ironically, sarcastically, satirically in that movie, because he's not cured, he doesn't seem to be changed or changed that much. Maybe that's also the case for Freddie, or maybe not. You should rewatch this movie and look at the end scene and ask these questions. Does Freddie get what he wants? Has the cause changed him and made him better? Is he the same man that he always was? If he's the same man he always was, the cause did nothing and can do nothing for him, and it's a failure. There are so many shots and transitions I love in this movie, and one is when Freddie finds Lancaster Dodd's ship, this masterful shot that goes focusing on the foreground, and in the background, foreground, background, is this poor man Freddie, this isolated individual walking towards this boat, and he sees a crowd, a group of people celebrating, and maybe he wants to go join them, maybe he needs safe harbor on a ship. That's how he finds the cult or cause. It's a contrast between rich or poor, the traumatized and those who feel comfortable with their own group, the lost individual and the cause or religious group. Obviously, the land and the sea, so many different things coming together in this wonderful, wonderful show. I just love this one to death. One question of this movie has how much this movie praise or criticize Scientology. I actually think it's kind of polite to it. It treats it fairly humanely, talking about its problems, the criticisms of the founder and leader. But of course, this movie is not necessarily about Scientology because it's fictionalizing history, which I personally prefer for film. I'd rather them talk about fictionalized versions, like Citizen Kane does. You know, a different person or fictionalized person based on real life, but not necessarily the same thing. And so here, Scientology, you know, Freddie finds a place, Freddie finds a home, and you can see they're trying to do stuff. They're trying to, use therapy to help people out. They're trying to get people back to perfect, to cure people of their trauma, and so on. Those are noble and just things to do, probably. But also then it's kind of a cult, whereas the Lancaster Dodd's son character says, played by Jesse Plemons, he's just making stuff up. And, it's kind of nuts when he talks about trillions of years. Seems to be nuts when he talks about trillions of years and other things like that. And then Lancaster Dodd is somewhat undermined, even as a great cult leader. First, his wife, Peggy Dodd. I think she seems to be the emperor wizard behind the scenes, not necessarily controlling him, but somewhat in charge and somewhat, spurring things on. She's sort of in the background in most scenes, and yet look at the ending, look at the middle, and you see her somewhat in control of Dodd himself, who I think in various shots is belittled, shown as little, undermined, put into the shadows. And then, of course, does Freddie control Dodd versus Dodd controlling Freddie? You would think the cult leader is the one who controls the little man, like Freddie, but in this movie, the way that Freddie charms Lancaster Dodd and gets him to befriend him is through alcohol, the masterful alcohol making that Freddie can do. And that's sort of a fairy tale-like quality, because here you have this sort of magician or wizard with his magic potion, and the word potion is used, charming the king or the aristocrat who is Lancaster Dodd, and then getting him into his good graces. Potion shows up throughout the movie. Freddie is alcoholic. Peggy Dodd hates that. He needs to be cured, not be non-alcoholic, in the classic American temperance movement vein, and Freddie is the alcoholic who can't get over it and always loves alcohol. And this theme continues throughout this sort of battle between the potion and the non-potion, actually between the magic elixir drink and then the hypnotherapy of the cause or cult. These two things are sort of at odds with each other. Will drugs work for you, or will hypnotherapy work for you? Those kinds of questions come up in this movie. I just threw a lot at you in this video. These are all suggestions. Some of these are speculations. Some of me making connections to things that are loosely connected to the movie. But I think this movie is deep and rich and invites all kinds of interpretations. And I think this film needs to be looked at formalistically for its technique more, so I probably should do another video on it. I'm curious what you think of The Master. This may be Paul Thomas Anderson's masterpiece or greatest work, one of them at least. Does it connect with you, though? Does it make sense? I try to make sense of it, and it works for me. What about you? Let us know in the comments. Please subscribe to this channel for more great content. Thank you, and have a great day.